God, how did we let it come to this? What is wrong with us? Oh. Alright. Time to face reality. Let's talk about this fucking election. Right now, we're faced with Clinton versus Trump, two of the candidates who have the highest unpopularity or disfavorable ratings of any candidates for the major parties since they started keeping track of these things. On the Republican side, we have Donald Trump, who's appealing to bigotry and hate and divisiveness. He doesn't really have any plans besides making America great again by making people hate each other and turning people against each other and appealing to all of the very worst things about humanity. The ugly American is a pejorative that's not used a whole lot anymore, but it really fits Donald Trump well. He doesn't even want the job. He just wants to be able to say that he won the election or that he was president, but he doesn't actually want to do it. It's like a Purple Heart. He doesn't want the responsibility. He just wants to be able to brag that he has it. And Hillary Clinton, on the other side, has a lot of experience, but her nomination has been rather questionable based on people at the rallies, based on the calendar that the Democratic National Committee set up, based on a lot of things that showed that they had decided who they wanted to win before the election even began and were bound and determined to make it happen. And as far as her as a candidate, she has some good things on her record, and I won't deny that, but there's also inconsistency, there's profiteering from arms sales, there's a promotion of perpetual war. She's very rarely progressive or ahead of the curve. She tends to change her opinions as the tides turn and does whatever's most popular without really giving a whole lot of clue what she actually believes. I'm not sure whether we should spin this election as Democrats were efficient enough to force the candidate they wanted on us while Republicans weren't capable enough to stop the candidate they didn't want, or if we should spin it as the Republican candidate was chosen by the will of the people while the Democratic candidate wasn't. Because both parties clearly seem to take the will of the voter as a disposable suggestion. So I'll concede all of this. There is a lot that we can be unhappy about with this election and how we got here and how valid these candidates are, how honestly they got there. Yeah, I will concede all of that. However, none of that is relevant because however it happened, whatever the path was, this is where we are. And on January 20th of 2017, either Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump will be inaugurated as President of the United States of America. No, not necessarily, you say. There's third parties. Okay, let's talk about third parties. The awful two-party system that we have set up is designed to lock out other parties. The Republicans and Democrats have a stranglehold on the political process, and they're not going to do anything about it. Nobody gives up this sort of power voluntarily. So there's two options to trying to break this realistically. One is preferential or ranked voting. That is used in a lot of other countries. If there's 10 candidates for an office, you don't just choose number one and that's it. You have to rank all 10 candidates, first, second, third, fourth, all the way down to 10th. And when they tally the votes, if nobody gets a majority, nobody gets 50% of the vote, they take whoever got the fewest first place votes, strike them from all the ballots. If they were first on a ballot, they're gone, and whoever's second moves up to first. And then they retally it. And if there's still nobody in 50%, they do the same thing again, and they keep doing that until they get to just one candidate who gets the 50% of the vote, and they are the winner. Now, there are some different ways it's done, but that's the most common, or one of the most common. With ranked voting of this nature, you don't have this argument about wasting your vote like we hear now, because you could put Trump or Clinton first and the other one last, whoever you prefer, and rank the third parties in between. You wouldn't have to worry about your vote for an alternative to Clinton ended up being a vote for Trump, or a vote for an alternative to Trump being a vote for Clinton. Now, this is something that's not going to happen because the existing parties are not going to allow that sort of power to be given to the voters, and they're not going to allow that sort of power to be taken away from themselves. Certainly not without there being a groundswelling of support from third parties pushing it, which aren't getting in there. So that gives the other option. So for a second option of how we break the two-party system, the third parties need to build from the ground up. Get elected locally, local governments, small towns, cities, get established, build a reputation, and work your way up. That way the party starts to stand for something and voters will recognize that. Well, how's that going so far? Well, the various state governments have legislative branches that have equivalents of the House of Representatives and the Senate at the federal level. And there are some alternatives to that. I mean, Kansas is unicameral, so there's only one body in the legislature. And there's some other odd things in different states, like the equivalent of the House of Representatives. California only has 80 members, while New Hampshire has 400. And since I think New Hampshire's population is about 8,000, that means that 1 out of every 20 people is a representative. I haven't checked the numbers on that, but that sounds right. Anyway, at the state level, there's 7,383 seats in the legislative branches. Of those, how many are held by people who are not Democrats or Republicans? A grand total of 40, which is slightly under 0.5%. Slightly over 0.5%. Which means if you take 200 members at random from various state legislatures, odds are you will have one who is neither Republican nor Democrat. So they're not doing a great job on that level either. Instead, they all seem to want to do three. Throw a presidential wannabe out there every couple of years, hope for a small miracle, and try for trickle-down popularity, apparently. Right now, the two big alternatives, the third parties that seem to be getting the most attention, are the Libertarian Party and the Green Party, both of which are, frankly, terrible. Libertarian Party, on the surface it sounds good. They're for smaller government. Okay. But they leave work where they got paid their government-mandated time and a half for working over 40 hours in a week, and they drive home on roads the government built and maintained, in a car that meets rigorous government safety standards. That vastly increases their chances of surviving an accident if something bad should happen. And they get to their home that's safe because it's up to government code for structure and wiring, without fearing they'll be attacked because the government provides law enforcement. And they greet their kids who have an education because they have to attend school. And the family eats a meal of food that passed health inspections, and then they go to their computer and hop on the internet, which was initially developed and funded by the government, and they go on their message boards and social media sites to bitch that the government has never done a damn thing for them and should get the hell out of their lives. Because they're morons with incredibly selective and arbitrary understanding of how forestalling anarchy works. On the other hand, there's the Green Party, which wants to believe they're a legitimate political party with a chance, but they're not even close. They take themselves seriously, but nobody else really does. Like Stein supporters, right now the primary candidate for the Green Party is Jill Stein, who I sometimes think of as Jill Green in my head, because that's my main thing that seems to be consistent about her. Stein supporters cheer when she's getting on the presidential ballots in various states. But if she's barely managing to reach the threshold of signatures for getting on a ballot, she's toast. I mean, for viability of third-party candidates, we really have to look back to 1992 when Ross Perot ran in the race between Bush and Clinton, George H.W. Bush and Bill Clinton. We actually have to clarify these things now. Ross Perot got 19% of the popular vote in that election. A lot of people forget that, but basically 1 out of every 5 votes cast nationwide went to him. This 19% of the popular vote warranted 0 electoral votes. He did not win a single state. So, 3-party race, you need to get at least 1 of 5 votes to even begin to be considered viable. And does anyone really believe that either the Libertarian Party or the Green Party has any hope of getting 1 vote out of 5? Especially since Jill's campaign basically boils down to, I'm not them. She doesn't stand for much of anything beyond that. I mean, you hear about the vaccines, but basically she's give quotes on both sides. There's people who think that she's anti-vax or pro-vax. Both are able to draw quotes from her, and they're both accurate because she is basically playing both sides. She won't just come out and say, "Get vaccinated, you idiots," so because she wants to appeal to anti-vaxxers in a desperate attempt to drum up enough voter support to pretend that she has a chance. She's equivocating. She's trying to appeal to both sides of an issue to get support from everyone, regardless of what she may actually believe. Much like members of certain other political parties, she insists that she is so vastly different from. The Green Party is kind of like the groundhog. Most of the time nobody gives a shit about it, but periodically it pops its head up, and it makes some noise, and if it gets enough light shone on it to see its own shadow, we have 4 more years of Republican rule. For people who are voting for the first time this election, or old enough to vote for the first time, most of them don't remember 2000, when Ralph Nader shaved enough votes off of Gore that Bush won Florida by less than 400 votes and took the presidency. And he then ignored the warnings, such as bin Laden determined to strike within the United States. 9/11 happened. He invaded the wrong country. He eliminated the budget surplus. He bankrupted the nation. He created the power vacuum in the Middle East. That gave us ISIS. You will never hear anyone say, "I voted for Nader in 2000, and I'm proud of how that turned out." In fact, Republicans fought to get him on the ballot in 2004. I was outside Barnes & Noble one time when some people came up, it was before the 2004 election, they were trying to get signatures to get Nader on the ballot in Pennsylvania. And I declined, and the person asked me why, and I said, because Nader splits the vote and it's more important to defeat Bush this year. And the look of anger in his eyes when I said that, he wanted Bush in. He was voting for Bush. He was trying to get Nader on the ballot to help Bush. He knew full well that a vote for Nader was basically a vote for Bush, and he was trying to get Nader on the ballot to help the Republicans. This is a large part of the reason why third parties are jokes. As they exist now, they cannot win, and for the most part, they're not even trying. The Green Party certainly isn't. They're not a legitimate party. They're a goddamn nuisance. The 8-year-old kids shrieking that they're an adult and deserve to be treated like one or else to hold their breath until they turn blue. When your entire party is, "I'm not them," you have no campaign. And when your entire strategy is to glom onto Bernie Sanders and try to pry his supporters away from Clinton, you officially stand for nothing at all. See, a phrase that gets bandied about a lot is the lesser of two evils. But that is generally unfair. I mean, I think Bush was terrible, but he wasn't evil. I thought Romney was terrible, but he wasn't evil. Dick Cheney, maybe evil. But what it is, it's not a choice between two evils, it's a choice between two non-ideal candidates. And having to make the best choice from less than ideal options is part of the responsibility of being an adult. Along with looking at the bigger picture and doing what's best overall, which is what Bernie Sanders has been doing by endorsing Clinton even while the Bernie or bust extremists are furious at him. He hasn't abandoned his principles. He's acknowledging that there are bigger concerns than his candidacy, while Bernie or bust is playing the same sort of clueless cult of personality approach that Trump supporters are, placing the candidate above the actual issues. Bernie is still living up to his ideals, just as he's done all along. It's just that some people don't recognize that because they are more interested in the candidate than they are in the actual concepts. Even for those who would vote for Sanders but won't vote for Clinton, though, I wonder, what terrible things do you think will happen under a Clinton administration that won't happen under a Trump administration? Fundamental dishonesty, perpetual warfare, policies driven by self-interest? What could Clinton possibly do wrong that Trump won't? I have given that a lot of thought, and I still have not come up with anything. And even beyond the presidential office itself, the longer-term issue remains the Supreme Court, which is where the president has a huge impact on the country long after their term is over. The conservative bloc on the Supreme Court gave us Bush over Gore. They rolled back parts of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, leading several states to immediately enact laws to suppress minority voter turnout. They gave us eminent domain to benefit corporate interests. Scalia once said that mere factual innocence is no reason not to execute a death penalty properly reached. basically saying that if court procedures are followed, it's okay to execute the innocent. And if that doesn't scare you, I don't know what will. This Supreme Court fought against marriage equality, although they did lose that one, thankfully. And Congress is stonewalling Obama's current nomination because they're holding out for Trump to win so that he can nominate people who think Scalia and Thomas are flaming bleeding heart liberals. This is going to be an important decision because the president is going to choose people who are going to be on the Supreme Court for most of the rest of our adult lives, or mine anyway. And the thought of it continuing in this course is terrifying. Like, if you don't like Clinton or Trump, that's fine, but coulda, woulda, shoulda, but here we are. It's going to be Clinton or it's going to be Trump. A third-party victory is a pipe dream, and it's not because the third parties don't get enough votes, so that's part of it. It's because the third parties aren't viable. They aren't doing what needs to be done to appeal to voters. They're trying to take the shortcut to the top. They don't want to earn the respect of the voters. They just want people to respect them for not being Democrats or Republicans, and it doesn't work that way. And while I appreciate the concept of voting your conscience, if that leads you to do a repeat of Nader in 2000, leads you to cast a vote that increases the chances of a Trump presidency, leads you to decide that you would risk the candidate who will not just not advance the country, but will actually roll it backwards, will roll back rights for women, rights for anyone who isn't white, rights for transgender people, a candidate who advocates and encourages violence against his political opponents and anyone who protests him, and who will shape the Supreme Court in his image. If endangering the well-being of that many Americans is an acceptable consequence to you of voting your conscience just so you don't have to vote for Hillary, well, I don't want any part of your conscience.